Well, if I'm being completely honest with you, Teen, I made a lot of mistakes. And so that's why I think I'm so well equipped to coach women now because I
Yeah.
know what I did wrong in hindsight. I had the idea that if I just put my head down and worked really hard, that people would recognize me, but nothing could be further from the truth.
Mm.
I mean, nothing could be further from the truth. Working hard and having a good work ethic is part of the equation, but it's not the entire equation.
Hey, I'm Tine Zekas, your pivot and pay strategist. I help Black women double their income by leveraging their existing skills. I am all about getting Black women paid, whether you're an employee or a business owner. And you're listening to the Getting Black Women Paid podcast. Let's go. Hello and welcome to the Getting Black Women Paid podcast. I'm your host, Tine Zekas, international speaker, award-winning author, founder and CEO of Getting Black Women Paid, and your Audacity coach. Today is a guest episode, and I am so excited to jump into it. We are going to be covering imposter syndrome, how to break barriers and build a career that honors your values. And we're going to talk about how our guest went from the Bronx to the boardroom, breaking those barriers all the way. So I'd love to introduce you to our guest. Sharon Ehrlich is an accomplished executive coach, public speaker, corporate trainer, and former IT executive with over 30 years of corporate experience. She holds an MBA from Adelphi University, a certificate in diversity and inclusion from Cornell University, and is an ICF certified coach specializing in empowering high-performing women to lead confidently and purposefully. Originally from New York City, Sharon has lived in Vienna, Austria for over 2 decades, giving her a unique perspective as an expatriate navigating personal and professional challenges abroad. Through her signature Living While Leading framework, Sharon helps women in leadership roles redefine success, set boundaries, and align their careers with their values. With a rich background that includes leadership roles at IBM, Citrix, and Veeam Software, Sharon combines her corporate expertise with her passion for mentoring mid-career women and women executives. Her work centers on addressing imposter syndrome, fostering inclusive cultures, and being strategic in living and leading authentically. Get ready to be inspired by Sharon's journey and insights. Let's get into it. Well, Sharon, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure to be here.
I always like to start with sort of an origin story question.
Okay.
You have gone from public housing in the Bronx to the boardrooms of IBM and Citrix, and that is quite a journey. So, what's the moment that you knew that your life was going to look different than the one you were born into?
The moment I knew was in high school. I understood that I didn't have to go to a local college, that actually I could go to university. That was the first really big thing for me because that was not understood. Nobody in my family ever had any advanced degrees, and I come from very humble beginnings. So there would have never been any notion that having higher education could be something that my parents could afford. Um, and once I started to understand that I could go to university, that I could go to a university outside of my community, I understood that I had a chance that my world could get bigger.
Mm. Oh, I love that. And you have this living while leading framework.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering what that means, and why do so many women in leadership struggle to do it?
It's quite interesting. When I start a coaching engagement with the women that I work with, I start out with something very foundational, which is doing a profile of them, of their preferences, What are their preferences for communication? What are their preferences for getting information? But equally important, how do others perceive them in the workplace? And this is a psychometric tool that I use that is well established. And this is incredibly insightful because I spend 1 hour reviewing this report with them. And all of a sudden, you can start to see the lights going off in their head. Oh, that's why that happens.
Mm.
Oh, now I understand myself a little bit better. And I use that as the framework as the basis for the framework and the discussions, because I think it's so important for us to be able to reflect in a very realistic way about who we are and how we relate to people. And
Yeah.
then we start to move on from there to understand what is it that they're trying to achieve and what or who is standing in their way. And
Mm.
then we spend time working through those things. And so, what I can say is my process involves lots of incremental moves as opposed to one big momentous action that's going to change anything. Because the fact is that if one wants to be strategic about how they're living and how they're pursuing their career, it's usually done in incremental steps as opposed to something, different than that.
Oh, I love that. Focusing on incremental steps, I think, can be so important because so many of us have these big, audacious goals. It can
Right.
be really intimidating to start pursuing that. So I love that you speak to, taking those incremental steps along the way.
And you know what else is important about the incremental steps, team, is that you can recognize your wins.
Yes.
And most of us, we don't recognize when we're moving the needle, when
Mhm.
we're moving forward, and we're so unkind to ourselves. And I see this with so many of my clients. But when you make incremental moves and they have to report back to me what they've done, and then I write them a report to show the progress week over week. And I say, you're making progress. Did you recognize that? And
Mhm.
sometimes this is the first time that they've actually consciously recognized that they're doing positive things because we're very demanding and very hard on ourselves. We're
Mm.
very forgiving of others, but when it comes to ourselves, we hold ourselves to a completely different standard.
Oh, you're so right, and so many times we're so focused on that big goal that we're not willing to celebrate until we've hit that thing, and it can be really discouraging to not be celebrating and acknowledging that progress you're making, so I love that you do that for your clients and really highlight that for them. That's awesome.
And sometimes the big goal changes, right? Sometimes we're pursuing something and we think
Mhm.
that that's our North Star. But
Yeah.
then as we go through the process, we realize, well, maybe that's not it. And this is also very important to understand that you're not chasing the wrong things.
Absolutely, and it's such a big part of sort of that growth mindset, right? That the goals can change, and it's not a failure to have shifted your priorities or changed your goal, and you can only do that when you're really acknowledging the journey and really reflecting on the process. Oh, I love
Yes,
that. Oh, that's awesome. And I want to address that. You've been living in Austria for over 2 decades.
that's
And
right.
and I'm wondering, how has being an expatriate shaped the way that you lead and coach, especially when it comes to, adapting to new cultures and challenges?
Well, the first thing is your audience probably doesn't know this, but I am a native New Yorker, and New Yorkers speak really fast. And one of the first things I had to do was really learn how to speak in a very measured way.
Mm,
My communication skills got so much sharper because I had to really listen with both ears. Because most of the people I was working with were speaking English as a second or third or fourth language.
yeah,
So that was something that was really important. But equally important was the fact that, we take it for granted as Americans. The country is so huge. You drive 5 hours in one direction, you're still in the United States, right? And in the part of the world that I'm living in, these borders are tight.
yep.
And when you cross a border and you work with people who come from other parts of the world, you have to be so culturally aware. And that is something that you have to do with intention, to say, I'm working with someone who comes from a culture that I don't know, maybe a culture that I don't understand. And
Mhm.
you have to be intentional about informing yourself and not putting the burden on your counterpart to educate you. Because I think that that's where a lot of American people go wrong. We sort of walk into situations thinking we're American and we're happy to be here and you're happy that I'm here and let's just go with it. And it doesn't work like that.
Mhm.
Being culturally aware and culturally sensitive is so incredibly important, particularly as a leader and when you start leading teams.
Mm. Oh, and I'm sure that's made you a really empathetic coach as well, being able to walk into spaces and understand, you know, this person has a different background from me and is coming from a different place. Oh,
Absolutely.
and and you mention that the role that that plays in leadership, and I know you've held leadership roles in tech, which those spaces weren't designed with women in mind, especially Black women.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, what's a strategy that you used to navigate those rooms without shrinking yourself?
Well, if I'm being completely honest with you, Teen, I made a lot of mistakes. And so that's why I think I'm so well equipped to coach women now because I
Yeah.
know what I did wrong in hindsight. I had the idea that if I just put my head down and worked really hard, that people would recognize me, but nothing could be further from the truth.
Mm,
I mean, nothing could be further from the truth. Working hard and having a good work ethic is part of the equation, but it's not the entire equation. And
mm,
once I started to understand that people had to know me, people had to understand not that I worked hard, but that I could deliver results that had an impact on whatever the strategic imperatives were. And the word impact is so important because you can be busy, but if your busyness is not having an impact on what's important to the organization,
mm.
nobody will notice you and nobody will talk about you. So that's something that I learned very well. I wouldn't say I learned it quickly, but I learned it eventually. And,
Yeah.
and the other thing is that you need to have, women are over mentored. Everybody wants to mentor us because they want to tell us what to do. But we also need sponsors. We need people who are talking about us when we're not in the room. That
Mm,
person who says, yes, Teen led this initiative. She did this, she did that. This is her impact. And when that position becomes available, your name enters the conversation because guess what? When that position is posted officially, they already know who they want, or the short list has already been decided. And
mhm.
if you don't have sponsors, you're not on that short list. It's just that simple.
Oh, I wanna highlight a few of the things you said just to make sure folks caught it. The first was the work is not gonna speak for itself. So many of us are taught, put your head down, do the work, and people will reward you for it. So I love that you address that and, learned the hard way and are now passing on that wisdom. And that when you do talk about your accomplishments and you do speak to the work you've done, to really highlight the impact of the work, right? It's not how many hours you worked, it's not which tasks you did, but the impact, the result that delivered for the organization. That's so crucial. And then towards the end, you were talking about, oh, I think I lost it actually. What was the last piece that you said?
Sponsors, having
Yes,
sponsors.
about having sponsors. That part is so crucial. As you said, people love to mentor a Black woman, right? But who's gonna be speaking up for you? And I'm wondering if you can tell us, how do we go about seeking those sponsors?
Sponsors are challenging to get because the relationship is built on trust, right? So you
Mhm.
can't tap someone on the shoulder and say, "Will you be my sponsor?" Right? But
Yeah.
what you can do is when you're working across teams, when you're working across departments, depending on what your structure is, where it is that you're working, is to get people to understand what you're about and who you're about. So this means being very intentional about inviting people for coffee, being very intentional about having a Zoom call if you're working remotely, one on one to talk to someone with no agenda. It's not that you want anything from them. It's not that you want to pick their brain, but people have to understand that you exist and you have to develop relationships with them. It's very simple. And I know, from my own clients, so many of them think, oh, but networking sounds so unsavory. I don't like that. That sounds so calculated. But guess what? That's where men really do well. And that's when we talk about the bros and the boys clubs and all of that. This is where they excel. And that's what moves their careers ahead. And we have
Yeah.
to get with the program. We have to be known. And the only way that we can be known is to put ourselves out there and get to know people. They're not going to tap us on the shoulder, so we have to tap them on the shoulder. That's the first thing. The second thing is it's not only about your work. High visibility projects, even if you have to volunteer, even if it's not part of your, strategic plan as it was, developed by you and your leader, those projects create visibility. So you have
Mhm.
to be creative. And sometimes this is something that I work with my clients is that they say, I don't know how I can get seen. And then we talk about it. We talk about everything that's going on in their organizations, in their communities, because sometimes they don't want to stay in their organization, right? They want to move someplace else. And so oftentimes the visibility is bigger than company X. The visibility might be across some sort of a network or an association or an industry. And you can do a combination of, in person, dialing into, events, even being active on LinkedIn. You cannot believe how important that can be in helping you meet people.
Oh, yeah, I love that you talk about visibility, right? Because there are so many, I call them non-promotable tasks that we volunteer for, right? I'll take the notes at the meeting. I'll, plan the baby shower for the coworker or what whatever it is, but it's, I'll volunteer to present that demo at this, this event that is going to have teams outside of my department there, right? That those high visibility tasks are the things that you really want to focus on. Oh, I love that you brought that up. And one challenge I know a lot of women can face, especially high performing women, who are at the top of their game, is there's still this imposter syndrome, right? There's always that chance that imposter syndrome is gonna creep in and try to sabotage us. And so I'm wondering, how have you dealt with that personally? And then, what's one way that you advise people who really need to figure out how to quiet that voice?
Right, right. I mean, I would be disingenuous to say that it has never happened to me because at different stages of my life, it has been very front and center.
Mhm.
And one of the ways that I've overcome it is to look at who's in the room. When you're having this meeting, and it could be like the physical room or the Zoom team room or whatever, the Teams room or something like that.
Yeah.
And you start to understand, you know what? I'm just as capable or even more capable
Mhm.
than a lot of people who are sitting on this call who are a lot more vocal than I am. And sometimes this realization alone is enough to quiet that inner voice that is telling you that you're not enough.
Mhm.
Of course, there are some things that you cannot discount. If you believe that because you didn't go to an Ivy League school, that somehow this is eroding your confidence. Well, we can't change that you have a degree from University X, but everybody else on the team went to another university. But you're in the room for a reason. You were hired for a reason. You bring certain talents to the table, talents that other people don't have. And again, this is about owning what you can do, owning your expertise, right? And talking about your expertise. And sometimes when we start to talk out loud, the words are actually emitted from our mouths and people acknowledge it. Sometimes this is enough for us to say, well, you know what? I do know what I'm talking about. Actually, most of us are thought leaders. And when you look at the data,
Yes.
particularly when it comes to African American women, we are the most educated people in the country. We have degrees over degrees over degrees,
Yep.
right? And so this means something. This means that we are probably experts in our domain 10 times over. And
Mm.
we have to acknowledge that. And we have to talk about it, and we have to get people to understand that. And when the little voice is coming in our heads, we have to remind ourselves of what it is that we bring to the table. And I also have to say, because this is quite important, sometimes the imposter syndrome is creeping in because we work in hostile environments.
Mm. Mm.
And I have news for you. If you're working in a hostile environment, there's probably nothing that you can do that is going to make you feel more confident. You have to leave. And I know that that's a strong thing to say, particularly in the kind of job market that we're in today, but that's not going to improve. So that will stay the same, and you're always going to feel small, or that you have to
Mhm.
shrink, or that, things are never going to happen to you. And that's a conscious decision that you have to make. Staying is a really conscious decision. And what I tell my clients when they find themselves in this situation, besides the fact that there are certain strategies that you can use to sort of insulate yourself to some minor extent from those kinds of environments, is to be strategic about planning your exit.
Yes.
Don't make it an emotional exit. Don't, throw your laptop at your boss and say, I'm out of here. Because you still have to pay your bills every single month, right? And
Mhm.
nobody wants that sort of pressure. And this is something that I've worked with a lot of my clients with. I just had a client now who came to me and said, I want to leave my company.
Mm.
But actually, when we started to work through it, it was the boss that was the problem. It wasn't the organization. And this is an organization with 250,000 employees. That means there are lots of positions. There are a lot of moving parts. People are leaving, people are quitting,
Yeah.
new initiatives are starting. And then at the end, she understood, I don't have to leave my company. I have to start positioning myself and meeting people, because I need to move away from this person
Mhm.
who's holding me back and making me feel like I'm not the right person for the job. And so there's no easy answer to the question, Teen. There are lots of different ways to deal with imposter syndrome, but understanding who you are and what you bring to the table, I think, is a really good starting point.
Oh, I love that, and I love that you had that caveat that if you're in a toxic work environment, there's no cure for imposter syndrome because you are regularly being told that you don't belong, right? And there are multiple ways to leave that situation, right? That it might be leave the organization, but it might be I need to transfer to a different department. However you can remove yourself from that situation. And so I love that you kind of talk about the distinction between those because it's not always the case that you have to leave the org, but it might be. So yeah, you want to assess, you know,
Absolutely.
what's the situation and what's going to be best for me to move forward. Oh, I love that. And it kind of reminds me that you talk about building your career in a way that honors your values. And so I'm wondering, what does that look like in real life? And how can women start aligning their work with, who they really are and what they value?
Yeah, this is a big one. And what I can say is, of course, the older I've gotten, the harder it is for me to have a poker face when people are talking nonsense, or
Yep.
when I hear BS. And the BS radar is really very heightened. And and I'll give you a real story. I was hired into a global role, and it was always my dream to have a global role, and I wanted a global role. And within weeks of having it, I realized this place is not aligned with who I am. Why? Because they had a very tricky relationship with the truth. And I'm a person who really has a very solid relationship with talking about facts and reality, and of course, not being brutal about it. And I understood very early on, I'm not going to last here. This is not going to work for me.
Mhm.
Because if I would have stayed, one of two things would have had to happen. I would have had to adopt their operating model, which
Mhm.
means I would have had to change my values. And I was not willing to compromise on that. So that would have been one option. The other option would have been to try to always fight it. And you know how exhausting that is if that's part of an organizational culture and
Yeah.
you're one Black lady trying to fight something. It doesn't work. Either, but both of them lead to a really bad outcome, would
Mm,
have led to a bad outcome for me. So I had to walk. I had to walk. And so, but that wasn't always the case. When I was younger, sometimes things were out of alignment. And I had to understand what is it that's out of alignment that is bothering me the most. And
mm,
is this something that I can tolerate because I'm here in this department for a minute and I know I'm moving on to bigger and better things? Or is this something that I have to figure out how I'm going to deal with because I'm here for the long road? So I would never be bold enough to say that we don't make compromises. Compromises sometimes have to be made in careers. It's a question of what are you compromising? How long are you compromising it for? And what is that going to do to you every Sunday night when you're thinking about starting work on Monday, right? And
mm.
all of those things come together. So again, not a real easy answer, but there are a lot of factors to consider in that particular situation when you're thinking about alignment of values or disalignment of values in the workplace.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's so right. And I'm wondering if we can kind of close with a bit of a reflection question. If you could sit down with the younger you, still in the Bronx, still dreaming, what would you tell her about what's possible?
I would tell my younger self not to be so focused on chasing money because you have to understand I came from very limited means. So I thought
Mhm,
making money would make me happy. And nothing could be further from the truth. Yes, we all need money, and I needed money. But what I think my message to the young Sharon would be pursue what you want to pursue, study what you want to study. You're going to find work, be a lifelong learner,
mm,
and understand that careers are not linear. Where you start today is not where you're going to be 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. And knowing that careers are not linear gives you the opportunity and the permission to
mm.
do the things that you really want to do and that give you joy and give you energy while you're learning something, while you're building skills, because just doing it for the sake of doing it doesn't make a lot of sense. So that's probably what I would tell young Sharon.
Oh, I love that. And for all of you listening, this is your permission to do what you want to do, to learn what you want to learn, and to move in some direction in your career, but know that it doesn't have to be a linear path. Oh, that's so great. And for those who are listening and are saying, "Oh, I want to know more about Sharon. I want to work with her," how can folks find you?
I'm quite active on LinkedIn. So if anyone of your listeners wants to connect with me or follow me on LinkedIn, I'd be more than happy to be connected with you. I also have a webpage, which is called livingwhileleading.com. And I also have a podcast where I release episodes twice a month. It's a leadership podcast focused on women in leadership. And the episodes are never longer than six minutes, 6 minutes. And the podcast is also called Living While Leading.
Oh, perfect. And we will have all of those links in the show notes as well so folks can find you. But Sharon, I just wanted to thank you for being with us today and for sharing your experience and your wisdom around living while leading, your advice on imposter syndrome, finding those sponsors. I think you've been such a resource for our listeners. So I want to thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me. It's been a pleasure.
All right. And thank you to all of you for listening. And we will see you in the next one. Hey, thanks for listening to the Getting Black Women Paid podcast. If you want to hear more episodes like this one, subscribe wherever you're listening now. And if you love what you heard, be sure to leave us a review. And make sure you share this podcast with the incredible Black women in your life so we can continue getting Black women paid. All right, we'll see you in the next one.